Hello, I'm Nicholas Thompson. I'm the CEO of The Atlantic, and I am delighted to welcome you to this special event, which is part of the Sotheby's Contemporary Conversation Series organized in partnership with The Atlantic, Nifty Gateway, and Intelligence Squared. Today we're going to be talking about NFTs, the new market for rare digital items. This is clearly one of the most exciting things in the tech world. It's an area where people are making a lot of money, getting really confused, getting a little bit angry, getting excited. There's so much going on. I was at a Easter dinner with my mother, who is an art historian, and at one point in the conversation she paused and said, "Nick, tell me what an NFT is." So in some ways, we're going to be doing this event for my mother. But we're also going to be doing it for everybody who is selling NFTs, buying NFTs. In fact, Sotheby's has a very exciting upcoming sale with PAC. There is a lot going on this topic. So let's get started. We have three very distinguished guests. We're going to have a lively conversation. We have Jon Ippollito. He is the professor of new media and director of the digital curation program at the University of Maine. He's a digital artist, curator, new media scholar, and the former curator at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. Hello, Jon.
Hey.
Good to see you here. We have Li Jin, founder and managing partner at Atelier Ventures, an early-stage VC firm. She's an advocate of the passion economy, which promotes new digital platforms to help entrepreneurs make a living from their individuality and creative skills. Hello.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
And she just got her first shot of the Moderna vaccine, so feel free to ask her lots of questions from less than 6 feet. And we have Max Moore. He is the co-head of Sotheby's Contemporary Art Day Sales. Max, hello.
Hello, hello. How are you?
You have a great background today. All right, so the format of the event, it's going to last for an hour. In the last 15 minutes, we'll be taking your questions. You can start submitting them now if you want. Underneath the screen, you should see a web form where you can enter your name and your questions. To submit it, enter your details at the box, click Submit. At around 6:45, they will be fed to me. I will then ask our distinguished panel the questions. But let's get going, and for the next 43 minutes, the four of us will be chatting, and then we'll open it up. So first question, all of you can answer in brief. How did you first come across NFTs and NFT art? Lee, let's get going.
Yeah, a few years ago, I was working at Andreessen Horowitz, which is a VC firm based in the Bay Area, and it was, I think, 2017, and CryptoKitties were exploding. We had actually invested in the company that makes CryptoKitties, which was one of the first blockchain games on Ethereum where you could buy, collect, breed, and sell virtual cats. And at the time, CryptoKitties was really popular and accounted for something like a quarter of all of the traffic on Ethereum. So that was my first exposure to NFTs, because every CryptoKitty was actually a unique NFT. And then fast forward a few years after that, now NFTs are in the mainstream, and it's really exciting to see that.
And Andreessen Horowitz and others are doing a lot with them. All right, Jon?
So I think I'm going to be the old man in the room, since I've been in new media art for quite a while. You might have heard the statistic that early on, 1995, 8% of all websites, like every website, was created by an artist. So artists have been early adopters of new media ever since the internet was born and before. And since then, they've come up with works of remarkable variety, from immersive installations where you don a vest and you can navigate by inhaling or exhaling, to pieces that are a flag for the internet, made of thousands of works by creative contributors. They've had impact as well as reach. So you've seen artworks that have changed court cases, artworks that have punished irresponsible corporations, all using the power of digital technology. So by those standards, it's not surprising maybe that I learned from artists about NFTs. In particular, Kevin McCoy at the 7x7 conference in 2014 is the first example I know of an actual sold NFT, and he was an artist. So I look at the marketplace of NFTs now, and I don't see quite that level of reach, or maybe reach, but not quite as much impact or relevance. But I do see a decentralized model that's really intriguing, and I think has promise.
Wait, hold on a second. Were you actually at that presentation in 2014, the McCoy presentation?
No, but I'm an old guard new media, internet artist, and we kind of follow each other. So I did
So you
find
were
out
close
about
to it, which is you still get cred for knowing about it in 2014 as opposed to 2021 gives you a gold star.
I probably didn't find out
Max.
until 2015. So
Silver star. Max, what was your first encounter with NFTs?
Well, John, you definitely have it on me then, because I was probably introduced in 2018 to CryptoPunks by a friend, given my position at Sotheby's as the co-head of the Contemporary Art Day Sale. I focus a lot on emerging artists, and a friend kind of turned me on to this idea. And at the time, I was completely skeptical. And even last year, my brother, who's an artist, had me sit in on a pitch by Async, which is one of the leading NFT marketplaces. And that too kind of left me more confused than inspired, I would say. But after further exploration and kind of dabbling in the different marketplaces, I was actually connected by chance with Pac, and that I can remember very specifically on January 6th. And that conversation started where Pac actually introduced me to how to create my own digital wallet, and over the next 4 months has developed into something quite beautiful and has really opened my eyes to the digital medium and its endless possibilities. And so it's really been incredible to be part of that kind of exponential growth that I'm sure we'll discuss today. But what I do find most interesting is that this is, for me, just the beginning. And I really look forward to seeing how the medium matures.
Well, that might have been the only good thing that happened on January 6th. I believe we also had the siege of the Capitol. So I'm glad that there is some promise on that interesting day. All right, so when somebody buys an NFT, what the hell are they buying? John, explain.
okay, I'll try to explain with the help of a little diagram. When people think of NFTs, they think of one system, but there's really a couple of them. There's really two different systems that are kind of interlocked. The blockchain is the famous thing. People have heard of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, but that is a sort of a big receipt in the sky, a ledger of transactions that everyone can read. It's very hard to tamper with, and is decentralized. So that's basically where the NFT lives. It's very secure, and it is something that is related to the kind of currencies you've heard of. In this case, it uses a currency called Ethereum, which is similar to Bitcoin. Then the actual artwork, which is often in these days a digital file, like let's say a JPEG of a unicorn riding over a rainbow. That's sitting out there somewhere else on the internet. It's not actually on the blockchain. So there are a couple options here. You can have it on a web server, which is like a URL that you're used to seeing, websites on, or maybe an asset that you have in some other format. Or it can be stored in a more secure kind of peer-to-peer network called IPFS, which means it's basically on a lot of different computers being bounced around with multiple copies, which keeps things safe. But the key part is the connection between those two, which is basically a link. And that link is a kind of digital fingerprint that identifies a particular file. There's a digital fingerprint for the transaction, like who minted, as we say, who created the NFT or non-fungible token, and then who sold it and who bought it. So there's fingerprints for that on the digital receipt. But there's also fingerprints for the file that it corresponds to, the artwork, our unicorn photo or JPEG. And that is a little bit of a sort of long string of characters and numbers that can be related to the transaction on our receipt. The tricky point, and then what's important about all this, is that the relationship between those two can be a little bit tenuous. And we can talk about that later, but suffice to say that when people talk about NFTs, they're really talking about two different things that are connected by a little bit of wire between the blockchain receipt and the digital file, the unicorn picture on the internet.
Right. So I draw a beautiful picture of a unicorn. I decide I'm going to sell it as an NFT. I put it up on Thompson.com. A little bit of wire connects it to the blockchain, And when you buy the NFT, the receipt goes onto the blockchain, which then tracks back to nickthompson.com, but you don't actually have the image yourself anywhere, correct?
You can get it, but that's not actually what you're buying when you buy an NFT. It's an unusual concept, especially if you're not used to the history of art and things like conceptual art, which actually explored the idea of immaterial ownership. But we are more familiar with the idea of patronage, and that's maybe a different model that we might consider. When you buy an NFT, it is pure ownership. There is no necessarily rights or physical or even digital asset that comes along with that, except the bragging rights to say, I bought this thing.
So, Max, why would you buy an NFT? For those beautiful bragging rights or for something else? Patronage, bragging rights, anything else?
Well, I think it's actually a different subset of collectors that are really interested and engaged with this new medium, and they've broken down the barriers of what art is to themselves, and conceptually have conceived the fact that art can actually exist in a completely digital existence and have no physical, component for it to be considered and appreciated as art. And I think, this NFT market craze over the past few months has really brought the connection between money and art to the forefront of our conversations. And that can somewhat be uncomfortable since, every transaction is viewable, but it's no different than kind of what we're experiencing or what we're seeing in the traditional art world as well.
So let me just follow up on this. My mom might be watching. She has bought art in the past, right? She'll go to somewhere, she'll go to a gallery, or she'll see someone on the street and she'll buy the art and then she'll put it on her wall. Convince her that there's real value in buying an NFT.
Well, you can't necessarily convince someone on taste alone. It really has to fundamentally come down to what aesthetic and what appearance one responds to and one appreciates, because art in the end of the day is completely subjective. What I think is really driving kind of the momentum and the adoption of the market are individuals that have clearly, responded to this new medium as an art form in and of itself, either conceptually or as a supporter of the artist. But I think what's happening here is that you have a redefinition or rediscovery of an art form.
Okay. Li, let's also talk about some of the economics here, right? Because one reason you might want to buy an NFT is to be able to sell the NFT. And in fact, if you have a lot of assets in crypto, you're somewhat limited in what you can buy and sell. How much of that is important? How important is that in the current market?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to have a discussion around the current craze around NFTs without addressing the fact that the broader context has been this rise in the asset prices for crypto assets over the last few years. Crypto assets are now at record high prices. I think Ether has about 10x in the last year. Bitcoin has almost 10x just over the course of the last year. And so you have this segment of the population which are newly wealthy, crypto wealthy, and who are looking to do something with that newfound wealth. And right now, when you convert that crypto back into fiat currency, there's a taxable event. So it's much more advantageous to keep it in crypto. And I think for a lot of folks in the community, they want to support creators and they want to support artists. And so I think there's an element of wanting to support creators, but also tying back to what you brought up about patronage, I think NFTs are this really powerful instance of something that my friend Jesse Walden calls patronage plus, where it's not just about supporting a creator for the sake of altruism and for the sake of being nice to someone. There's an added element, which is, yes, you're supporting a creator, but there's also potential upside for the owner of the NFT, for the buyer. So you're at once both supporting a creator financially, but you also get personal upside in the form of this NFT whose sale price might go up in the future and can be resold later for a profit.
Right. Can you buy an NFT with non-cryptocurrencies?
I think there are some websites that allow you to enter a credit card information and buy it with US dollars. And what's kind of happening under the hood is that they're creating kind of a wallet and in crypto assets for you. But at the end of the day, you're interacting with a file that lives on the blockchain. And so the NFT itself is a crypto token. And so there's a transaction that's happening on chain. And so typically transactions are happening using Ether.
Right. I've always wondered though, I mean, I completely understand why the transaction is tracked on the blockchain and why the receipt is on the blockchain, right? So you have an immutable record, it can never be destroyed, it's part of the genius of the NFTs. I don't quite understand why the finances also have to be run through the blockchain.
Well, yeah, so typically the way that the flow would work today is that a buyer of an NFT has to go purchase some Ether from an exchange like Coinbase and convert dollars, US dollars, into Ethereum, and then engage with the NFTs that way and purchase them that way. The reason why that happens is because the NFT itself is a crypto token that lives on the Ethereum blockchain. So there's lots of technical reasons, but essentially every time you're transacting with an NFT, you're interacting with the Ethereum virtual machine, and you're interacting and doing actions on chain. And in order to do that, you need to have these crypto assets, crypto tokens.
All right, well, I will get my mom some crypto tokens. Jon, what do you have to say about the risk and rewards of investing in NFTs?
Great question. So we might think about what the motivations would be for a collector or someone who was going to invest. And Lee mentioned the idea of like, you're not just supporting the art, but you're actually getting something back. So what exactly is going to be the value of your investment? When we think about that earlier question of why would your mom pay money for something that's immaterial, 50 years ago, your mom was asked, or your grandmother was asking that question about Warhol. Why are people paying money for a Brillo box? I can go to the, corner store and buy one for, well, probably 10 cents, 50 years ago. But clearly an item that didn't seem like it had an inherent value when in an art context, it should be higher than its value, when you get it just at the store. And in the internet age, the value of a JPEG is zero because you can go to the internet, click save as, and then you've got it on your computer. I think so we might ask ourselves, looking at what happened to Warhols that were, originally, there's a story of a woman who bought one whose father had worked with Warhol, and he got it from Warhol for $1,000, and then it, sold recently for $3 million. So there's these, enormous sort of value increases in particular works that at the time had a lot of people scratching their heads. So one of the outcomes for an investor is you end up with Warhols, and in a matter of years or decades, they're worth millions, even though you bought them for a song. Another outcome, though, is that they're not worth that much, actually, but the government ends up viewing these, or museums or whatever, as a kind of important art form. And so you can basically gift them to a museum and get a tax break, right? Not as great as the $1 million prize, but not too bad when it comes time to filing mom's taxes. Then there's the folk art option, which is that, we'll come back and look at these things and say, wasn't that a crazy period in the internet? And everybody was really hyped about this stuff. And look at all the people who came out to contribute. Isn't that neat that everybody made their own unicorn painting? And we'll view folk art the way we do now, which is that many of the items of folk art are really intriguing and socially interesting, almost from a sociological perspective. Are they, important additions to the progression of art history? No, but, and they don't command those kind of prices, but, we still see them as somewhat valuable. And then the sort of worst scenario is what I call the digital Pog scenario. Pogs was a game that people played with milk, sort of the caps of milk bottles. And at a certain point around 2009, they became very popular. People collected these things. They were animated, they dazzled. This is a particular artist collection of digital pogs, Michael Bell Smith. And they were in some ways a little bit like NFTs. They weren't connected to the blockchain. They weren't, they didn't certainly command the kind of prices that we see in NFTs now, but they were the hot item for a month or two in 2009. And you might be saying, well, why is this thing I've never heard of at all relevant to NFTs? It is because you've never heard of it. Precisely that's why it's relevant, because it came and went. So the digital POG scenario is kind of like the worst scenario. And if I look into my crystal ball and I'm trying to be realistic here, I would say that most of the NFTs are going to end up digital POGs. No one will remember even why they existed, and they will not have no kind of inherent value except maybe for, you know, historians. You'll get, you know, a certain share that will be folk art, and maybe even some for tax donations. But the Warhols in the bunch, I think, are going to be very few and far between.
And part of the issue is that the marginal cost to create a new NFT is zero, right? I could make 1 billion NFTs. I mean, there would be costs for me. I'd have to list them on every exchange. I'd have to set minimum bids, right? But the cost to create an NFT is zero, right? Whereas the cost to create a painting, you need some paint, you need a canvas, right? There's, you know, anybody can paint, but it's much harder to make a painting than an NFT.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on where the costs are, and we can talk about what costs are inherent in an NFT transaction. I will say that making the digital work of art, remember I suggested we really think of those as two separate things. There's the asset that lives on the internet, your unicorn picture, and then there's the NFT, which is just a kind of receipt for your purchase of that. The cost of making the unicorn picture could be next to zero. I once did an analysis of making a New York style, you know, oil painting versus having an artist website, and the art style art, you know, oil painting was just vastly more expensive. But you know, listing something, that's just the digital asset. Once it comes to actually listing on an exchange, there's a lot of costs that are kind of behind the scenes. There's costs of minting, there's gas fees. And that ends up meaning that unless you've got $1,000 to put in as an artist, you're unlikely to make much, even if you do sell. And then there's the whole question of promotion, which we can get into otherwise. I think it's really important, though, at some point that we also talk about the cost to the environment. Because as some of your viewers probably know, cryptocurrencies and the blockchain in general, in its most in the most popular forms, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, are a tremendous and deliberately wasteful use of computing resources, and that translates to a lot of methane and you know, fossil fuel emissions in the sky. You're basically burning through, you know, whatever it is, gas, coal. Various forms of energy that could be used elsewhere. The process of confirming transactions and writing them to the blockchain is a competition between multiple sites that all have server farms that are all trying to see who can solve the problem first. It's kind of set up that way as a competitive system, which makes sense until you realize that there's tons and tons of wasted computer cycles and lots of electricity that goes into that. So, for example, to transact one, I don't know, sale on Ethereum, the Ethereum network, costs the same amount of energy as maintaining one American household for a day. So if tomorrow everybody and their mom bought one NFT, the US's daily rate of carbon emissions would double for that day. Now, there are proposals for changing that, and they have good and bad sides. But it is irresponsible not to think about those costs when we think about the NFT economy.
Lee, do you want to talk about this, since this is, of course, something that has been a critique of cryptocurrencies and all transactions on the blockchain? When will we actually start to solve this problem?
Yeah, so there's definitely a valid point that's being discussed right now, and I think it should be discussed around the environmental cost associated with NFTs. At a high level, the way that consensus works on the Ethereum blockchain today is through proof of work, which is very computationally intensive, and that is why it requires so much energy, and that's why there's an environmental cost associated with minting and transacting for NFTs. But the plan for Ethereum has always been to move from this consensus mechanism of proof of work to proof of stake, which will be a lot more energy efficient. And so I think we'll make great strides in that in the next year. A couple of other points to bring up, though, is there's carbon offsites and green NFT initiatives also taking place right now to try and address this sooner before that shift to proof of stake. And some of those initiatives entail like purchasing carbon offsets to offset the carbon emissions from the energy usage required for NFTs today. So I think that's a step in the right direction as well. And then lastly, I would also say that even traditional art has a carbon footprint and has environmental impacts associated with it. It used to be the case, centuries ago, that in order to make pigments, had to harvest, rare beetles or shells and extract pigments from actual creatures and from nature. And obviously that has an environmental impact. I think in general, everything that we do as humans on this planet has an environmental impact. And really the conversation should expand to what is the environmental impact? What is the human impact of all of the steps of the value chains of everything that we're purchasing and consuming? When we purchase makeup products, there's ingredients in makeup products that rely on child labor. There's cobalt in the batteries of our phones. What is the environmental impact of mining for cobalt? I think right now NFTs are getting a lot of scrutiny that is, out of proportion relative to all of the other things that we as human beings consume. And I think it gets that scrutiny because there's transparency. We can see exactly how much energy every single transaction takes. But I would like us to move beyond just scrutinizing NFTs to scrutinizing the impacts of everything that we do.
All right, let's move to a different topic. Max, let's talk a little bit about why artists are selling their NFTs, right? Obviously, they can make a lot of money and they can use that money to buy carbon offsets. What else are artists getting out of this new market?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. What I've noticed is that there's, I'd say, 3 different opportunities for artists to pursue in this kind of new media, in this new marketplace. The first being what I'd like to define as a crypto native artist, such as Pac, who's really using kind of the blockchain technology and building out the smart contract technology to embed further meaning into their creations and to really push the boundaries of what our conception of or previous beliefs of digital art and what they can become. I think that this is quite a revolutionary viewpoint for these artists, and these are the artists I think that have the potential to really make great strides in pushing this new medium forward. And then, of course, you have some digital artists who previously have excelled in their respective careers or their respective fields, and using the blockchain technology as the first time to kind of tokenize their creation, whereas they could have never tokenized or made any sort of commercial money off of their sales before. And so this technology really allows a whole new set of artists or creators focused in digital medium to monetize. And I think that that's a really interesting addition to the conversation and the adoption or the further progression of contemporary art. And then, of course, you have finally the traditional artists that, or the painters and the sculptors that we are familiar with, even in the contemporary art day sale at Sotheby's, who are now intrigued by the medium and understanding and trying to explore how their output can actually be used and implemented through the tokenization and the NFTing of their work.
And Lee, you've talked about, I used to be the editor of Wired. Kevin Kelly wrote that in the future artists will just need 1,000 true fans, and you've written about artists just needing 100 true fans. Explain this hypothesis, what it means, and how it's relevant to NFTs.
Sure. Yeah, so I wrote a essay, I think a year ago, called 100 True Fans. And it was a riff on Kevin Kelly's idea of 1,000 true fans and how on the internet you didn't need to be a mega celebrity with millions of fans and audience members in order to be able to earn a decent living. On the internet, you just needed 1,000 true fans, was his thesis. And those 1,000 true fans would pay you something like $100 a year, and you could make a full-time living on that. And the internet unlocked that because people would pay you directly. You were cutting out a middleman that would take a slice of that revenue. And so you could earn a living just off of this 1,000 true fans. And so my essay took it one step further, saying, actually, you just need 100 true fans. And if that 100 true fans is each willing to pay you $1,000 a year, then you can make a living off of an even smaller base of fans and followers. And I think NFTs actually are an extension of this conversation, where it's enabling, with a lot of the NFTs that are being sold, they're being sold through an auction mechanism. And so there's really powerful price discovery that's going on. And super fans who really love that creator, really want to support that artist, are bidding up the prices of some of these works to really, really high amounts. On the screen right now is an image of an NFT that I sold last month. It sold for 13.37 ETH, which at the time was about $25,000. And so, you know, there weren't many products before that I would have ever priced at $25,000, but because this was an auction and because it was a one of one, there was only this one NFT that I sold. That's what the price ultimately ended up going for. So I think NFTs represent this way for artists with even smaller followings than 1,000 or maybe even 100 people to potentially be able to make a living just from their super fans. And I've called this one true fan recently. Like, maybe we can move beyond 1,000 or 100 true fans and just have artists make a living off of their one true fan. And it harkens back to the Renaissance idea of patronage, where you just have a powerful patron that supported the artist's entire body of work.
I am hopeful of having one true fan, and that one true fan being Jeff Bezos. And then it would be very easy to live off that number. Jon, do you think that the way that the NFT market will shake out is going to be good for lots of artists, a very small number of artists, extremely good for 3 artists? How is it going to work?
Honestly, I think it's going to be very good in the short run for a small percentage of artists. It would be great if we all had a patron, but remember that, you know, the patron has to have more money than us, as you said, with Jeff Bezos, than for this all to work out, right? Because if my patron is my poor neighbor, well, you know, we already share some kayaks and milk when we need to. So I think we have to think more about a deliberate assessment of the system to see if it really is equitable and will be that way, and will spread the wealth around. So on the screen, you're seeing a little chart of a study done of the traditional art market, right? So this is brick and mortar galleries, selling works, auction houses, your Warhols and your Basquiat's and more contemporary work as well. The stats don't look good, right? I mean, you've got, see if I can start my own diagram, you know, 68%, thank you, 64% of sales go to the top 1% of artists, right? And these sales are all more than $1 million. So we're talking about a very extreme, what we might call income inequality, right? And that's not surprising to any of us who've worked in the art world, that, you know, to some people, it feels like a lottery system where a small privileged few, you know, get the money. Some people question whether there is a correlation between, you know, quality as the sale prices get higher. But even if there is a correlation, it's not clear to me that art benefits by having only a few people make all the money. On the other hand, we can do a similar analysis of crypto art, right? And so this is from a site that ranks the kind of, you know, earnings of different crypto artists. And it's a little better, right? It's closer to 50-50 than the other chart. But is it something to write home about? No, because you still have 50% of the people getting 50% of the sales going to 1% of the artists. So we're seeing a bit of the same, you know, kind of hierarchy emerging from the crypto art scene. Does that mean it has to be that way? Could we imagine alternatives? Yes, I think we can, but we have to also be realistic about the current state of affairs.
And do you think that there are any, this is a question for anybody here, are there any changes to the way the NFT market works that could make it more equitable, could change that pie chart so the bottom 50% are getting a much larger share of the market?
I can chime in here. So I think the really powerful thing about the internet in general, which also applies to NFT space, is that a lot of times the successful creators, the successful founders, the successful entrepreneurs, they're not folks who have inherited relationships. They don't have any sort of privileged upbringing or a base of personal relationships that they leaned on to get to where they are. They had to earn those relationships and build that community of support themselves. And so even though the earnings distribution is still a little bit skewed in the NFT world as shown by that pie chart, I think what it doesn't quite illustrate is the fact that NFT artists and the successful digital artists who are doing great NFT sales right now, they're often not folks with traditionally prestigious backgrounds. They aren't from, they didn't inherit their relationships. They cultivated them on the internet. And I think that moves us one step more towards a more meritocratic system than what had been traditionally in place.
And in fact, you could argue that that will likely continue to be the case, right? Because the barriers to entry to make an NFT are zero, right? You don't have to go to art school. You don't have to have a fancy paintbrush. You don't have to, know wealthy people. You just have to know how to make a digital file and put it on OpenSeas, right?
Yeah, exactly. The barriers to creating something digitally are much lower. No one really cares, like, which art school did this person go to? Where were they educated? Who was their teacher? Who are their family members, et cetera? Who else is collecting? I think because the NFT space is so new, so nascent, I think there's really possibility for anyone to still be successful.
And do NFTs have to be digital? Can I make a physical NFT?
There's a lot of really interesting work going on with NFTs as it relates to physical objects. So the NFT can actually just be a token on the blockchain that represents a physical item that's offline. So for instance, there's experiments being done where you can redeem your NFT for a physical item, like a bottle of wine or a sweatshirt or a piece of merchandise. The token itself still lives on the blockchain and is digital, but it represents ownership over a physical item.
John, you want to jump in here?
I think there's some interesting models, again, pioneered by net artists who've thought about ways to convert things that normally wouldn't be sold in immaterial form to create a kind of economy, often either with a sort of provocative or a sort of political intent. In the case of the work at Left, Keith Obadike famously auctioned off his blackness on eBay, saying that it was an heirloom that had been in the family for generations. He'd had it for 28 years, but he also warned that it was not recommended for applying for jobs or cashing checks. So the fact that he was able to do that was not something, obviously, that he intended to sell for money, but something that was a sort of reflection and a provocation about what race means in America. On the other slide shows a picture of a project called Terra Zero by 3 artists who are imagining what it would be like to tokenize a forest. So every tree, every kind of bush in this forest would have a presence on the blockchain, would essentially be an NFT that could be supported and in principle could even support itself, creating a kind of alternative economy to the one that would be created by someone coming and clear cutting it. Also, if there's any mushrooms in there, it might create the possibility of non-fungible fungus, which, we knew that was coming. In the meantime, these are models that artists are trying because they're not really happy with the current system. They're not happy with an economic system that rewards people who already have, the people whose business sense outweighs their art sense, let's say. So even if there is zero cost to creating an NFT, there actually is a lot of cost to promoting it. If you don't already have, 50,000 followers, the chance of you getting seen in a very large marketplace like OpenSea is very low. So you either have to be accepted by a curatorial platform, one of the marketplaces that does is much more selective and curates its selection, in which case you're kind of dealing with a middleman again, like the old gallery system. Or you have to spend a lot of time and a lot of part of your life promoting yourself and your work, which is true of regular art, but it raises the question of that's time that someone has essentially devoted to a job of promotion as opposed to the job of making their own work. What does that do also to the nature and the quality of the work that's produced?
That's a very, very interesting idea. We just have about 4 minutes before we go to audience questions. Let me ask, Max, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and then you can pretty much take us into the questions. The first is, how will NFTs retain their value over time? Right? It's an issue that we've touched on, but clearly the value of art changes on all kinds of things. And then secondly, explain what Sotheby's is doing with PAC. How is that going to work? So take those 2 questions, and then we'll go to audience Q&A.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, listen, I think just going back to that kind of slide that Jon presented about the 1% of artists receiving, I guess 50% of the profit in the contemporary market, I would say that this is true because there's an underlying kind of understanding or validation of quality in the end of the day. And right now, like a Basquiat is a Basquiat to the person who's buying it at $10 million versus the person who's just enjoying it at a museum for me. And right now what we're seeing in the NFT marketplace is a lot of work coming to the marketplace that doesn't necessarily is not necessarily thought-provoking. It's not necessarily driving a different conversation. And I think it's driven a lot because artists are following and chasing money right now. And what I also expect to happen is that there will be a little bit of a correction in the marketplace. It's inevitable given just how much demand and how much volume has traded over the past few months. And when that dust settles, I think we will actually kind of understand what we're dealing with here, which is true artists that are kind of uncovering and leading the way into this new marketplace, into this new by discovering and utilizing the tools at their disposal to really promote this new medium in an interesting way. And people will respond to that. People respond to those concepts, to the quality that they're creating, and that will be validated ultimately by monetary means. And then bringing that back to Sotheby's, I'm super excited to be showing PAC as our first NFT in Sotheby's nearly 300-year history, and I'm super confident that we've made the correct decision by choosing PAC just because of the way that they're approaching this and pushing the boundaries of what NFT is. What's going to be interesting about this sale is that there's an open edition component with a starting price of $500 that starts on Monday afternoon. And at $500, this really allows a true inclusive nature, which I think speaks to the spirit of the NFT marketplace. And what I do expect is a lot of crypto native enthusiasts to collect and purchase, but also to attract some of the more traditional clients that may be buying their first NFT for the first time in this sale. And that's really what's going to be exciting to see.
All right, exciting. Well, stay tuned on Monday and check back in then. So let's go to audience Q&A after that fabulous conversation. Lots of good questions have already come in. You can submit more and they will be funneled to me through the Zoom chat. Let's go to this one first. Anybody can take this. Are NFTs a fundamental shift in how the art market will function, or are they merely a collecting trend? Is this a fundamental shift? If this is a fundamental shift, what other trends and developments could we anticipate seeing from the NFT market? Who wants that one?
So I'll take a first stab at it. The way I envision this marketplace existing is not as a disruptive nature to the contemporary or the traditional physical marketplace, for example. It's more an extension of art as a medium through exploration by different creators and reaching a completely different audience that may not necessarily be interested or be, engaged with contemporary art in that same way. So again, it's not a cannibalizing marketplace that's going to overrun or overtake the traditional market. It's really can exist parallel and in tandem and as an extension of and create a nice harmony in between.
Okay, does anybody else want to jump in there? Or otherwise we have plenty more questions to go to. John or Lee, you want to respond or move on? I will jump to the next question. What are some ways NFTs allow artists to show appreciation to their collectors and supporters that may not have been previously possible? Lee, you want to take that?
Sure. I can talk about my personal experience during my NFT sale last month. I would say what I didn't fully, so for context, I decided to sell this NFT just really as a learning experience for myself. It wasn't about the money and selling it for a certain price. I just really wanted to see what everyone else was talking about and experience it viscerally as a creator. And what I didn't fully expect was the strength of relationships that I built along the way. During the auction process, which lasted for 24 hours, multiple people reached out to me via Twitter DM or email saying, hey, I've been a longtime fan of yours and I placed a bid on your NFT just as a way to get your attention and as an excuse to talk to you. I fully did not expect that to happen. It blew me away. And then in the end, like the buyer of my NFT, he and I now talk basically every day. Same with the second highest bidder. There's multiple bidders from this NFT experience that I now have actually developed relationships with and I would consider to be friends and collaborators. So I think it's a huge shift from traditional online creation, which I would describe as more broadcast in nature, where the creator is creating something and an audience consumes it. In the NFT space, at least for my personal experience, it was much more, it shifted that relationship to be one that was bi-directional because the auction mechanism, plus the fact that all of the transactions are so transparently recorded there, it meant that I was paying attention to them and I wanted to get to know who they were and why they were placing these bids on my piece just as much as they wanted to get to know me and support me. So it really lifted up the fan creator relationship to one that was more of everyone on an equal footing and created this interactivity and this two-way relationship, which I think was quite special. And then I would just add to that, I've seen a lot of NFT sales happening on the internet over the past few months, and a lot of creators will advertise a set of bidder or holder benefits. So in addition to purchasing the artwork, they will add in additional benefits that the bidders, all of the bidders get access to, or that the winner of the auction will receive in addition to the NFT. And those benefits could be being added to a group chat, having a Zoom call with the creator, all sorts of different benefits that serve to really help establish a relationship between the creator and their fans.
So interesting. All right, another good question here. Could NFTs provide a second life for original classics and other physical art, giving way to a new version of prints as we know them? John, you want to take that?
Actually, I was hoping to respond to the previous one, but I could try the physical thing.
I think you want to take the previous one? You want to take the previous one? We can go back. I got to rewind.
Yeah, I'll take the previous. Short version is Tom Brady, right? Like look at the market of collectibles and NFTs. I think that's a no-brainer. There's lots of 1,000 true fans out there. Maybe not everyone's a Tom Brady fan, but enough are that his program I think is going to do quite well. To go back to the previous question, I'm all for lowering making a more reciprocal relationship between artist and viewer, and the internet art has been really good at that. And I think NFTs right now are a really, really shallow version of the amazing participatory potential that's been demonstrated by other internet art. But that doesn't mean NFTs don't have promise of their own. So in 2015, a year after his first NFT sale, Kevin McCoy came up with a smart contract that was designed to allow to sort of foster those kind of connections downstream between the creator and the collector, and by implication backwards. Essentially, this conveyed all kinds of options to the buyer that are not currently part of the NFT spec. So the buyer, in fact, has no rights over the object that they buy, that unicorn JPEG, by virtue of the NFT contract itself. The baseline, some marketplaces may add in other stuff, but the baseline doesn't have that. Actually, okay, so this picture shows a certificate of authenticity, something that was designed well before the internet, before computers, in fact, or at least in the early days in the 1960s, to sell works like minimalist art that might be destroyed in one place and recreated in another without being shipped overseas. Or even works of conceptual or land art for which it's very hard to kind of hand over an object to someone. And these instruments did more than just sort of say, yes, I sign this over to you. They also conveyed a whole bunch of rights, including rights to the image, non-exclusive copyrights, but also instructions on recreating the work if it needed to be recreated. Something that's now embodied in instruments like on the right, the variable media questionnaire. What's important about this is if we rewind, 5 or 6 years to 2014 and think like, well, what if NFTs had just taken off back then when they were first introduced? A lot of the things that you see now on marketplaces that are moving, sort of animated imagery would have been made with a technology called Flash. And you might have heard of Flash recently because you've got little pop-ups on your desktop telling you that it's dead and you need to deinstall it. So files in the digital world go obsolete. As Bruce Sterling says, your laptop has the lifespan of a hamster. It's just the sort of current state of obsolescence thanks to technological progress. So if you just have a contract that says I own a file and the file cannot be opened, that's not much of a contract. But if we expand our sense of what that contract can be to include things like the ability to recreate it, not just the right to do so, but instructions for what should be saved, suggestions, should it be migrated, should it be emulated, should it be reinterpreted, all of these strategies that are available now for preserving works if we have the right to do so. But also things like remix. In his original smart contracts, Kevin McCoy suggested that you could pass on the ability for the owner to modify and sort of proliferate versions of the work. And that empowers them to suddenly become part of that equation in a really more reciprocal way, in my view.
So let me ask you this, because we've talked about McCoy a couple of times here. So McCoy's partner in this initial presentation is a guy named Neil Dash, and he wrote an essay for us at The Atlantic titled, NFTs Weren't Supposed to End Like This. When we invented NFTs, we were trying to protect artists, but tech world opportunism has struck again. And his argument is that the hype around NFTs has, in some ways, blocked all these innovations that you're talking about, and the innovations that McCoy thought and that he had thought would come. Is there a way that NFTs end up enabling the same kind of vision for the future that McCoy and Dash had, but feel like isn't coming?
I hope someone has a better answer than I do. I mean, we can always hope, right? There are moments when history doesn't happen in order, right? Sometimes there's remedial periods, we go backwards and then we have to go forward again. And I think that some of the sort of backlash against NFTs has to do with that kind of disillusionment at their early potential and the fact that so many exciting options were put on the table at the beginning. But I think we can still look toward models of change. Lee mentioned the proof of stake algorithm that would change Ethereum for the better. That has been a proposal since the beginning. It's not something new that people said, like, we really should do something about climate change in 2020. No, it's there from the beginning, and it just needs enough people to get behind it and say, we're not going to trade NFTs on proof of work. That's just too much cost to the environment. And if enough people sort of explore something creatively enough, I have the hope that it could succeed.
All right, let's move to another audience question. Maybe Max, you want to take this one? What do owners get out of owning an NFT?
Yeah, absolutely. So, similar to the way that a traditional collector gets, value in terms of that physical interaction between a painting, they also get, what's beneficial in terms of the financial remunerations of ownership. And I think what we're seeing right now with NFTs is, while everyone can respond and interact with the NFT that I own, for example, that I've made a purchase to, it's only me who can actually, resell that for a financial gain or loss, for that matter. But there's a collectorship, there's like a gamified avenue that one could take to start understanding kind of the benefits of NFT collectorship. All
right. Let me ask you another question, Max, that popped in, which is, why pack? We're going to have this auction. Why?
Absolutely. So Pack, again, as I classify them as a crypto native artist, I think it's important that Sotheby's first sale featured one of an artist of this ilk, of this kind of caliber, of this kind of style or conceptual approach, because I really do believe that Pack's work showcases the true potential of what crypto art can become. And you'll see throughout the sale that there'll be different introductions of concepts and announcements that really speak to a crypto native community that's already growing and established by Pack previously, but I think can also appeal to a traditional collector who's just getting into this new marketplace for the first time. There's a lot of new concepts that'll be uncovered in this sale, so it's definitely one to stay tuned over the 3-day period and continue watching and participating in.
All right, well, we are closing in on our end time, so I'm reminded of Li's point that there may well be NFTs that you can exchange for a bottle of wine, which seems like an excellent idea right now. Let's wrap this up. Thank you, Jon. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Li. This was an absolutely fabulous conversation. Thank you to Sotheby's for hosting us, and everybody have a good night.